T parfefade. They say the worst kind of betrayal never comes from your enemies. It comes from the person who laid beside you for 10 years, held your hand when you cried, and swore in front of God and your family that they would love you until their very last breath. My name is Sarah. And for a decade, I thought I was living the quiet, comfortable life every woman dreams of. My husband Mark was an architect, talented, ambitious, and quietly charismatic. When we met in our late 20s, he didn't have much. He was working out of a cramped, rented studio with broken heating, drawing blueprints until 3 in the morning. I was a junior accountant at a firm downtown. We lived on cheap coffee, instant noodles, and big dreams. I believed in him when nobody else did. When his first business partner walked away and took half their savings, I gave Mark everything I had saved from my own salary to keep his doors open. When he stayed up late, stressed to the point of tears, I was the one who made him tea, rubbed his shoulders, and told him, "Mark, you are going to make it. I know you will." And he did. 10 years later, Mark's architectural firm, Vanguard Designs, was one of the premier luxury builders in the city. We moved out of our modest apartment and bought a stunning 4-bedroom house on the quiet outskirts of the city. We had a pristine lawn, expensive furniture, and 2 cars parked in the garage. To the outside world, we were the gold standard of a successful marriage. Friends often joked, "How do you two keep the spark alive after 10 years? Mark would always laugh, wrap his arm around my waist, kiss my cheek, and say, "Because Sarah is my anchor." I couldn't survive a single day without her. Every time he said that, my heart swelled with pride. I truly believed we were an unbreakable team. But looking back now, the signs were always there. I was just too blind, too loyal, and too deeply in love to see them. It started about 6 months ago. Small things at first. Things you easily brush off when you trust someone completely. Mark started coming home late, not just 30 minutes late, but 2 or 3 hours past dinner time. At first, it was always the same excuse: a client meeting went long, or the new high-rise project is draining every drop of my energy. Sarah. I felt sorry for him. I left dinner in the oven to stay warm. I poured him a glass of wine. I made sure the house was completely silent so he could rest. Then, the subtle changes in his behavior began to stack up. He put a new, complex passcode on his phone, a phone that had always been left open on the kitchen counter in the past. Whenever he received a text message late at night, he wouldn't pick it up in front of me anymore. He would glance at the screen, turn the face down, and suddenly slide it into his pocket. If he answered a phone call, he would stand up, walk out to the back patio, and lock the glass door behind him. When I asked him about it one evening over dinner, he looked at me with a coldness I had never seen in his eyes before. "Sarah, please," he said, setting his fork down with a sharp click. "I manage a multi-million-dollar company now. I deal with confidential corporate clients and high-stakes contracts. You wouldn't understand the legal complications. Don't be paranoid. You wouldn't understand." Those words cut deeper than he realized. I was a senior financial analyst at my firm. I understood contracts and numbers better than most people. But because I loved him, I let it slide. I told myself I was being overly sensitive. Work was stressful. He was under pressure. I needed to be a supportive wife, not an overbearing one. Then came the subtle shift in how he treated me. He stopped looking me in the eye when we spoke. The affectionate kisses on the cheek before leaving for work turned into quick, transactional nods. He began making subtle, cruel remarks about my appearance. "Are you really wearing that to dinner?" he asked one Friday night as we prepared to meet his business associates. "It looks outdated, Sarah. Look at the wives of my partners. They dress for the position their husbands hold." I stood in front of the mirror, holding my dress, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. I was 36 years old. I was clean, wet, and well-groomed. But suddenly, in my husband's eyes, I was no longer enough. The real shift, however, happened on a rainy day in mid-October. Mark had left for work early that morning, claiming he had an all-day conference in the neighboring city and wouldn't be back until very late. Around noon, I realized he had left his tablet on his home office desk. The tablet connected to our joint cloud storage where we kept household expenses and utility records. I sat down at his desk to transfer our annual property tax documents. But when I opened the cloud drive, there was an unsensed folder sitting on the screen. It wasn't labeled Tax Documents or Vanguard Designs. The folder was named simply M. My hand hovered over the trackpad. A voice inside my head screamed at me to close it, to step away, to trust my husband. But another voice, a quiet, terrifying intuition, told me that if I closed this window, my entire life would remain a lie. With trembling fingers, I double-clicked the folder. Inside were hundreds of files, photos, receipts, hotel bookings, airfare tickets. My breath hitched in my throat. I clicked on the first image. It was a photo taken on a tropical beach 3 months ago. A weekend Mark had told me he was attending a grueling real estate summit in Chicago. In the picture, Mark was standing on a white sand beach, laughing, his arm wrapped tightly around a young, beautiful blonde woman. I recognized her instantly. It was Chloe. A 24-year-old interior designer Mark had hired at his firm just 8 months prior. My heart felt as though it had been physically ripped out of my chest. The room began to spin. I grabbed the edge of the desk, just to keep myself from falling off the chair. I clicked on another file. It was a PDF invoice for an apartment lease downtown, a luxury high-rise penthouse. The tenant named Chloe Vance. The guarantor and payer Mark Reynolds. The monthly rent $4,500. Paid directly out of our corporate reserve account. And then, I found the worst file of all. A drafted PDF document dated just 3 weeks ago. It was a legal asset restructuring proposal written by Mark's personal attorney. The document outlined a calculated, step-by-step strategy to slowly siphon assets out of our joint personal accounts, transfer ownership of our marital home into a private trust, and dilute my ownership stake in his firm. He wasn't just having an affair. My husband of 10 years, the man I had built from nothing, the man I had funded, nurtured, and believed in, was systematically preparing to leave me completely bankrupt, homeless, and discarded, all so he could start a brand new life with a woman 10 years younger than him. I sat in the dark office for 2 hours, staring at the glowing blue light of the laptop screen. The tears that started as a flood eventually dried into a cold, terrifying stillness. The grief was overwhelming, yes. The heartbreak felt like a slow, burning poison in my veins. But as I read through the legal papers detailing how he intended to destroy me, the grief began to transform into something else. It turned into absolute, ice-cold clarity. Mark thought I was just a naive, trusting housewife who would break into pieces, cry on the floor, and sign whatever divorce papers his high-powered lawyers threw at me. He thought my quiet nature was a sign of weakness. He had forgotten who I was before I became his wife. He had forgotten that I managed corporate balance sheets for a living. He had forgotten that I knew where every single penny in his empire was hidden. He wanted to betray me. He wanted to take everything I worked for. Fine. I closed the laptop screen, wiped the last tear from my cheek, and took a deep, quiet breath. Mark had planned his move. I thought to myself, now it's my turn to play. When you discover that your entire life is built on a foundation of lies, every single second after that moment feels surreal. I stood up from Mark's desk, carefully closed the laptop screen, and returned his tablet to the exact angle it had been sitting before I touched it. I wiped down the wooden surface. I checked my reflection in the glass cabinet door. My face was pale, my eyes slightly red, but my breath was steady. That was the moment I made a rule for myself. No tears in front of him. If Mark suspected for a single second that I knew about Chloe, about the penthouse, or about the secret legal documents, he would move fast. He had top corporate lawyers on his side. He had access to capital. If I confronted him out of sheer emotion, screaming, throwing things, demanding explanations, he would simply lock down the accounts, shift the rest of the assets into offshore trusts, and leave me with nothing but legal debt. I couldn't afford an emotional reaction. I needed a calculated strategy. At 6 o'clock that evening, the front door opened. I heard the familiar sound of Mark's keys jingling, followed by his heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor. "Sarah, I'm back." His voice echoed from the hallway. A wave of nausea washed over me. 6 months ago, hearing his voice would bring a warm smile to my face. Now, it made my skin crawl. But I took a deep breath, pasted a soft, welcoming smile onto my face, and stepped out of the kitchen. "Welcome home, honey," I said, my voice completely smooth. "How was the conference?" Mark set his expensive leather briefcase on the entryway table. He looked tired, but there was a subtle, distant look in his eyes. A look I now recognized as the preoccupation of a man leading a double life. "Tedious," he sighed, walking over and giving me a quick, routine kiss on the forehead. "Endless meetings with investors. My head is pounding." He was looking straight into my eyes, lying without a single flinch. The man I had spent 10 years of my life with could lie to me while touching my face, without his pulse even raising. "I made your favorite," I said softly. "Herb, roasted chicken. Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes. "Thanks, Sarah. You're a lifesaver." he muttered, heading upstairs to change. As he walked up the staircase, I stood at the bottom, watching his back. Enjoy your meal, Mark, I thought to myself. Enjoy this quiet, peaceful house. Because very soon your cozy little world is going to implode. That night, while Mark slept soundly beside me, his breathing slow and even, I lay wide awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. My mind was working at light speed. I was an accountant. Numbers don't lie, and numbers always leave a trail. Mark might be a brilliant architect, but when it came to complex financial structures, he relied heavily on standard templates and advice from his legal team. He was arrogant enough to believe that because I had stepped back into a mid-level analyst role to support his career, I had lost my sharp eye for detail. He was wrong. The next morning, as soon as Mark left for his office, I went to work. My first call wasn't to a divorce attorney. It was to an independent forensic accountant named Arthur Vance. Arthur was a retired auditor who had worked with high-net-worth corporate fraud cases for over 30 years. He was quiet, relentless, and completely discreet. 2 hours later, I met Arthur at a small, obscure coffee shop 3 miles outside my usual neighborhood. I sat across from him, laying out printed copies of the files I had discreetly backed up onto a secure flash drive from Mark's tablet. Arthur put on his reading glasses, flipped through the pages, and slowly shook his head. "This is classic Sarah," Arthur said in a low, raspy voice. "He's using what we call asset dilution. Over the last 9 months, small amounts, ranging between $8,000 to $12,000, have been transferred weekly from Vanguard Designs into a shell holding company registered in Delaware." "Who owns the shell company?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Arthur looked over the top of his glasses. "It's registered under an LLC where the primary beneficiary is listed as Chloe Vance, and your husband as the sole managing director." Hearing it confirmed by a professional made it feel brutally real. The knot in my chest tightened, but I kept my composure. "How much has he moved so far?" I asked. "As of last week, roughly $750,000, Arthur replied, closing the folder. "And if this drafted agreement you found goes through next month, he plans to sell the commercial property housing his firm's headquarters to that same shell company for a fraction of its market value. Once that happens, he can claim the firm is in financial distress during a divorce proceeding. You would walk away with pennies on the dollar, while he retains effective control of everything through the LLC." It was a masterclass in corporate betrayal. Mark wasn't just leaving me for a younger woman. He was actively engineering my financial ruin. "What do I need to do, Arthur?" I asked, leaning forward. Arthur smiled thinly, a sharp, cold smile. "Right now, you do nothing to alert him. You act like the most oblivious, loving wife in the world. Meanwhile, I will trace every single transaction tied to that shell company. But you need to get me physical access to his office computers and his private ledger. Can you do that?" I thought about it for a moment. Mark's office at Vanguard Designs was secured with digital keycards and security cameras. But as his wife, I frequently brought him lunch or dropped off documents he forgot at home. The staff knew me, respected me, and never questioned my presence. "I can get you access," I said quietly. "What else do we need?" "Proof of bad faith," Arthur explained. "Financial fraud in a marriage is serious. But if we can prove he was actively funneling marital assets to sustain an extramarital affair, while intentionally trying to defraud you, the judge won't just award you half. They could strip him of his executive control. Consider it done," I said. Over the next 3 weeks, I played the performance of a lifetime. Every morning, I made Mark his breakfast. I ironed his shirts. I listened to him talk about how stressful his work was, nodding sympathetically while secretly recording every detail of his schedule. When he told me he had an overnight business trip to Chicago, I smiled, packed his bag, and wished him luck, knowing full well he was taking Chloe to a 5-star resort in Miami. While he was on that trip, Arthur and I went to work. Using my access card and knowing the security codes Mark used for everything, I entered his private office late on a Thursday evening under the guise of dropping off his dry cleaning. Within 45 minutes, Arthur had cloned the encrypted hard drive of Mark's master computer. What we found on that drive was even worse than we imagined. Mark hadn't just used corporate funds for Chloe's rent and trips. He had taken out a secondary mortgage on our family home, the very home I had paid the down payment on 10 years ago using my inheritance. By forging my signature on a power of attorney document, he was using our home as collateral to secure a multi-million-dollar loan for his new development project. Sitting in Arthur's office, looking at the forged signature on the legal document. The last piece of my heart that held any warmth for Mark Reynolds turned into pure ice. He didn't just want a fresh start. He was gambling with my life, my shelter, and my future, treating me like collateral damage in his pursuit of greed and vanity. "We have everything," Arthur said softly, looking at the mountain of evidence spread across his desk. Bank records, forged documents, wire transfers, and photographic proof of the affair spanning 8 months. "You could file today and freeze his accounts." I stared at the forged document for a long moment. "No," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. "If I file today, his lawyers will tie this up in court for years. He will negotiate a settlement. He will keep his firm, blame his accountants, pay a fine, and walk away with his reputation intact." "What are you planning, Sarah?" Arthur asked, eyeing me with newfound respect. I looked up at him with a slow, deliberate smile. "Next month is Vanguard Design's 10th anniversary gala," I said softly. "The mayor will be there. His biggest investors, his clients, the press, and his new board members will all be in the room. Mark is planning to announce his new luxury expansion project that night." I leaned back in the chair, feeling a cold, sharp sense of purpose settle over me. "He wants a grand stage to show off his success," I whispered. "So I'm going to give him the show of his life. To destroy a man like Mark, you don't attack him when he's down. You wait until he feels completely untouchable. Arrogance makes powerful men careless." Mark believed he was the smartest person in every room he walked into. He believed that because I had been a quiet, supportive wife for a decade, I lacked the nerve to fight back. He saw my gentle demeanor as stupidity, and my patience as submission. He was about to learn the difference between submission and self-control. With the Vanguard Design's 10th anniversary gala only 3 weeks away, the entire company was running on high alert. This wasn't just a party, it was Mark's crown jewel. He was preparing to announce a $50 million waterfront development project funded by some of the city's most prominent real estate investors. If the project launched successfully, Mark's valuation would triple, cementing his status among the elite. And behind the scenes, he was planning to use the momentum of that night to quietly hand me divorce papers the very next morning, leaving me with a leveraged house and liquidated bank accounts while he stepped into his new life with Chloe. He thought he was running the clock. In reality, I was setting the timer. 3 weeks before the gala, Mark came home late again. It was nearly midnight. He threw his jacket onto the couch, poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, and dropped heavily into his armchair in the living room. "Sarah," he said without looking at me, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The venue coordinator for the gala is failing miserably. The catering order is a mess, and the media presentations aren't organized. I need someone I can actually trust to oversee the final event arrangements." I sat across from him, holding a book, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "You want me to step in?" I asked softly. "You're good with details," he said, taking a slow sip. "And frankly, I don't have time to hold people's hands right now. Handle the event planning, the audio-visual presentation team, and the guest check-ins. Make sure the media display goes off without a single hitch." I felt a sudden, electric thrill run through my veins, but not a single muscle on my face moved. He was handing me the keys to his own execution. He was literally putting me in direct, absolute control of the main audio-visual presentation at the biggest event of his life. "Of course, Mark," I replied, my voice sweet and dutiful. "I'll make sure the presentation is something nobody in that room will ever forget." "Good," he muttered, closing his eyes. "That's a relief." Over the next 2 weeks, I moved with surgical precision. By day, I visited the grand ballroom at the St. Regis Hotel, where the gala was to be held. I met with the tech crew, the event managers, and the media coordinators. I was polite, extremely organized, and exceptionally generous with tips. The technical team quickly grew to adore me. They saw me as the dedicated, brilliant wife working tirelessly behind the scenes to make her husband look like a king. They had no idea that every directive I gave them was designed to set a trap. While managing the event, I was also coordinating daily with Arthur, my forensic auditor, and a top-tier corporate litigation attorney named Victoria Vance. When Victoria saw the evidence Arthur and I had gathered, the forged mortgage papers, the secret shell company, the diverted funds, and the paper trail linking every dime directly to Chloe's personal accounts, she leaned back in her high-backed chair and looked at me with deep respect. "Sarah, this isn't just a standard divorce case anymore," Victoria said, tapping her pen against the glass table. This is a massive case of corporate fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. If we take this straight to court tomorrow, Mark will be tied up in litigation for years. But if we play this right, we won't just get your half back. We can freeze every asset connected to Vanguard Designs before he even realizes what hit him. I don't just want the money back, Victoria, I said, my voice steady and cold. I want him to answer for every single lie. I want the investors, the city officials, and his new circle to see exactly who Mark Reynolds really is. Victoria nodded slowly. The legal filings are completely prepared. On the night of the gala, at precisely 8:30 p.m., my team will file emergency injunctions with the county clerk. Every corporate account, every personal line of credit, and the title to his firm will be frozen instantly based on the forgery evidence. Perfect. I whispered. 8:30 p.m. is right when he takes the stage for his key speech. While the legal storm was gathering, Mark's arrogance was reaching its peak at home. He began making subtle mistakes, completely blinded by his own sense of victory. One afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, his phone rang on the kitchen counter. It was a text notification from Chloe. Because Mark was in the shower upstairs, the screen lit up clearly. Can't wait for the party, babe. Did you tell the boring wife she's sitting at the back table yet? I stood over the glowing screen, reading the text twice. 6 weeks ago, reading a message like that would have broken my heart into 1,000 pieces. It would have sent me crying to the floor, asking myself what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough, why 10 years of devotion meant nothing. But today, it didn't hurt at all. It only reinforced the absolute righteousness of what I was about to do. I didn't delete the text. I didn't hide the phone. I simply set it back down, took a sip of my water, and went back to chopping vegetables. When Mark came downstairs in his plush bathrobe, he picked up his phone, read the text, and quickly swiped it away. He looked up at me nervously, testing to see if I had noticed anything. I looked back at him with a gentle, warm smile. Everything okay with work, honey? I asked innocently. Yeah, Mark said, clearing his throat and slipping the phone into his pocket. Just an update from the interior design department about the stage decor. That's great, I said, placing a plate of food in front of him. Eat up. You're going to need all your energy for the big night. He looked at the plate, then looked up at me, a momentary shadow of guilt passing over his eyes. For a fraction of a second, I thought he might say something, that some remaining shred of humanity inside him might prompt a confession, an apology, or a moment of honesty. Sarah, he said slowly, his fork hovering in the air. You've really been a great support these last few weeks. I know I've been distant. You don't have to apologize, Mark, I said softly, sitting across from him. I know how important this gala is to you. You've worked 10 years to build this life, and trust me, I know exactly what you deserve. He smiled, completely missing the razor-sharp edge in my words. Thanks, Sarah. After this gala, everything is going to change. I promise you. Yes, Mark, I thought as I watched him eat. Everything is going to change. But not the way you think. The day before the gala, I made one final visit to the St. Regis Hotel ballroom. I handed the lead AV technician a small. It contained the master presentation file that was scheduled to play on the giant 300-inch LD screen right behind the podium, the exact screen where Mark was supposed to project his grand architectural renderings for the $50 million project. Remember, I told the technician with a warm, reassuring smile. This is a surprise tribute video I put together for Mark to celebrate his 10 years of hard work. Do not plug it in until 8:30 p.m. sharp, right after he finishes his opening remarks and introduces his lead investors. I want it to be a complete surprise. You got it, Reynolds. The technician replied with a smile. He's a lucky man to have a wife like you. Oh, I said quietly, turning to walk out of the hall. He has no idea how lucky he really is. The night of the Vanguard Design's 10th anniversary gala arrived with a cold, clear rain that slicked the pavement outside the scene. Regis Grand Ballroom. Inside, the hall was a shining sanctuary of wealth, power, and prestige. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting a soft, golden light over 300 distinguished guests. City council members, high-profile real estate developers, media reporters, and corporate investors moved across the polished marble floor, holding glasses of vintage champagne. At the center of it all was Mark. He wore a tailored charcoal tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled, his teeth gleaming as he shook hands with the city's elite. Standing right beside him, dressed in a sparkling silver silk dress that screamed for attention, was Chloe. She stood close enough to Mark that anyone with half a brain could see the unspoken intimacy between them, yet far enough to maintain a laughable veneer of professional boundary. And then there was me. I arrived 30 minutes after the event began. I was dressed in an elegant floor-length midnight blue gown, no loud jewelry, no desperate attempts to stand out. I walked into that room with the calm, quiet poise of a woman who already knew how the night would end. As I walked across the ballroom floor, several old friends and colleagues of Mark greeted me warmly. "Sarah, you look breathtaking," said Arthur's wife, who was in on the legal timing. She gave my hand a gentle, knowing squeeze. "Are you ready for tonight?" "More than ready," I replied with a serene smile. "Tonight is all about unmasking the truth." Mark saw me from across the room. A brief flash of irritation crossed his face, likely because I looked far more composed and striking than he had anticipated. He excused himself from a circle of venture capitalists and walked over to me, holding 2 champagne flutes. "You're late," he muttered under his breath, handing me a glass with a tight, artificial smile for the benefit of nearby onlookers. "I told you to be here by 7 to greet the mayor's delegation. Traffic was heavy, Mark," I said, taking a subtle sip of the champagne. "Besides, it looks like Chloe has been doing a wonderful job keeping you company." Mark's jaw tightened. He glanced back over his shoulder at Chloe, who was watching us with a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. She held her glass high, offering me a mock toast across the room. "Chloe is an integral part of the marketing team for the waterfront project," Mark whispered, his tone sharp and defensive. "Don't start acting jealous tonight of all nights, Sarah. There are camera crews here. Keep it together, jealous." I let out a soft, melodious laugh that made him blink in confusion. "Oh, Mark, I'm not jealous at all. In fact, I think tonight is going to be unforgettable for both of you." He searched my face for a moment, trying to find the usual anxiety or insecurity he had grown accustomed to over the last 6 months. But he found nothing, only an unreadable, icy stillness. "Just go take your seat at table 4, he said curtly, turning his back on me. "I'm going on stage in 10 minutes. I watched him walk away toward the grand stage at the front of the hall. Above the stage hung a massive, 300-inch high-definition LED screen, currently displaying the glowing gold logo of Vanguard Designs. I walked over to table 4, situated near the front left of the stage. Standing near the edge of the VIP section was Chloe. As I passed her, she deliberately stepped into my path, holding her champagne glass. "Mrs. Reynolds," Chloe said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "It's so nice of you to join us. Mark was worried you might feel out of place among, well, the modern corporate crowd." I stopped and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was young, ambitious, and utterly convinced that she was the architect of my destruction. She genuinely believed Mark loved her, that she was winning a prize. "Chloe," I said, keeping my voice soft so only she could hear. "You know, when a man steals a diamond to give it to his mistress, he usually makes sure it's real. But when a man steals from his own foundation, just to buy a fake, he usually ends up losing everything." Chloe's smile faltered, a look of confusion, and a sudden spark of unease, flashed across her eyes. "What are you talking about? Enjoy the presentation," I whispered, patting her shoulder gently. "It's dedicated to all the hard work you and Mark put in together." Before she could respond, the hall's main lights began to dim. The heavy, dramatic bass of the venue sound system chimed, signaling for guests to take their seats. It was 8:25 p.m. I took my seat at the table, folding my hands neatly in my lap. I checked my wristwatch. In precisely 5 minutes, Victoria Vance's legal team would submit the emergency freeze orders to the courts and notify the firm's primary banking partners via certified digital delivery. Mark stepped up to the podium. The spotlight caught him perfectly, making him look every bit the visionary leader he pretended to be. The audience erupted into warm applause. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and valued partners," Mark began, his voice booming clearly through the loudspeakers. 10 years ago, Vanguard Designs was nothing more than a dream sketched on a paper napkin in a tiny, cold apartment. Today, we stand on the brink of reshaping this city's skyline with our $50 million waterfront luxury complex. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. In the front row, his chief financial investors beamed with pride. "Behind every great architectural masterpiece is a vision," Mark continued, spreading his hands wide. "A vision built on integrity, dedication, and unyielding trust. Tonight, before I introduce our lead investors, I want to share a special visual breakdown of the foundation that built this empire." Mark turned toward the giant screen behind him, raising his hand in a dramatic gesture. Roll the presentation, Mark announced proudly into the microphone. Back in the AV booth, the lead technician inserted the black USB drive I had given him the day before, hitting play. The giant screen flickered. The crowd quieted down, waiting to see the state-of-the-art 3D architectural renders of the luxury waterfront towers. Instead, the screen went pitch black for 3 long seconds. Then, a bold white text appeared across the 300-inch display, accompanied by the crisp, haunting audio recording of Mark's own voice played clearly through the high-end sound system. Don't worry about Sarah. She's clueless. By the time the divorce goes through, the shell company will hold all the assets, and she won't have a single dollar left to fight me in court. A collective, sharp gasp echoed across the room of 300 people. Mark froze at the podium. His face drained of all color in a single second. The silence in the St. Regis Grand Ballroom was deafening. 300 of the city's most influential figures, investors, politicians, journalists, and corporate leaders, sat frozen in their seats. The clear, unfiltered recording of Mark's voice echoed off the high marble walls, repeating every cruel word he had uttered in private. By the time the divorce goes through, the shell company will hold all the assets, and she won't have a single dollar left to fight me in court. Mark stood glued to the podium. The confident, charming smile he had worn just moments ago completely shattered. His eyes widened in sheer terror. His breath caught in his throat, and for 5 endless seconds, he couldn't even move his hands. Stop the tape. Mark finally choked out, his voice cracking into the microphone. He spun around toward the tech booth at the back of the room, waving his hands frantically. Turn it off. There's a technical glitch. Stop it right now. But the AV team had explicit instructions for the high-priority presentation, and before the panicked technician could hit the kill switch, the screen transitioned to the next slide. High-definition scans of legal documents appeared on the 300-inch screen. First came the forged power of attorney form, the document Mark used to put a secondary mortgage on our home without my consent, with my signature blatantly falsified beside his stamp. Next was a high-resolution chart created by Arthur Vance, detailing the exact paper trail of $750,000 funneled from Vanguard Designs into the offshore shell company M. Vance Holdings LLC. The crowd burst into a roar of hushed whispers and sharp gasps. Is that financial fraud? A prominent city councilman in the front row murmured, leaning over to his colleague. Look at those wire transfers. An anchor investor whispered loudly, his face turning dark red with anger. He was draining corporate capital while pitching us for $50 million. Mark's chief lead investor stood up from his table, his eyes burning with fury. Mark, what the hell is the meaning of this? Mark fumbled at the microphone, his hands trembling violently. It's a mistake. Someone hacked our system. My wife. This is a malicious attack on my character. He looked down from the stage, searching desperately for me in the crowd. Our eyes met. I was sitting calmly at table 4, sipping my champagne. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply looked back at him with the cold, unyielding glare of a woman who had taken control of her own destiny. Beside me, Chloe's face had turned completely ghost white. The camera crews brought in to cover the luxury project launch had already swung their heavy lenses away from the stage and pointed them straight at Chloe and Mark. Flashbulbs began strobing rapidly like lightning across the hall. Chloe scrambled out of her chair, covering her face with her purse as reporters shoved microphones toward her. Miss Vance, is it true you're named as the sole beneficiary of the shell company? A reporter shouted. No comment. Get those cameras out of my face. Chloe shrieked, knocking over a glass of red wine as she tried to flee toward the exit doors. Then, right on cue at 8:30 p.m., the double mahogany doors of the ballroom pushed open. Walking in with calm, authoritative steps were 4 men in dark suits, led by my attorney, Victoria Vance, and 2 uniformed officers of the Financial Crimes Division. The room went dead silent once more as Victoria walked up the center aisle, holding a crisp white leather file. She stepped right up to the stage, looking up at Mark, who stood trembling behind the podium like a trapped animal. Mark Reynolds. Victoria's voice carried clearly across the quiet hall. I am Victoria Vance, legal counsel representing Sarah Reynolds. As of 8:25 p.m. tonight, the Superior Court has granted an emergency injunction based on overwhelming evidence of grand larceny, bank fraud, and document forgery. Mark tried to speak, but no words came out. He clutched the edges of the wooden podium just to stay upright. All primary and secondary bank accounts belonging to Vanguard Designs, as well as all assets tied to M. Vance Holdings, have been officially frozen, Victoria continued, handing a formal copy of the injunction to the court bailiff beside her. You are stripped of your executive signing authority effective immediately. Pending a full criminal and civil audit, the entire ballroom erupted. Reporters rushed the stage, flashbulbs lighting up the scene like a lightning storm. Mark looked around the room, completely overwhelmed. He looked at his investors. They were already on their phones with their corporate attorneys, pulling their capital and terminating their contracts. He looked at his employees. They stood in shock, realizing their CEO had bankrupted the firm for a secret affair. And finally, he looked back at me. I slowly stood up from my chair. The room seemed to part for me as I walked down the center aisle toward the stage. Every eye in the building was glued to the quiet wife who had just dismantled an empire in 5 minutes. I stopped at the base of the stage, looking up at the man who had tried to leave me homeless and broken. Sarah. Mark gasped, taking a shaky step down toward me. His eyes filled with tears of pure panic. Sarah, please, talk to me. We can fix this. It was a mistake. I was confused. Please. Don't do this to us. I looked at him, at his trembling hands, his ruined suit, his destroyed reputation, and I felt no anger left, only a deep, profound sense of justice. There is no us, Mark, I said, my voice quiet, clear, and perfectly audible in the quiet room. You built your entire world on a lie and expected me to pay the price for it. You thought my silence was weakness. You were wrong. I took off my wedding ring, the band of gold he had used as a mask for 10 years, and set it down gently on the edge of the stage speaker. Consider your presentation complete, I whispered. I turned my back on him and walked out of the St. Regis ballroom. Behind me, I could hear Mark shouting my name, begging for another chance, as police officers asked him to step off the stage to answer questions regarding the forged mortgage documents. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors into the cool, rain-washed night air, I took my first deep, real breath in 6 months. His betrayal was massive. But my answer had left him completely shattered. The aftermath of that night was swift, relentless, and absolute. When you tear down a house built on sand, the entire structure collapses all at once. Mark had spent years convincing himself that he was an unstoppable mastermind, but without his lies, his hidden accounts, and the quiet, unpaid labor I had provided for a decade, he was nothing more than a man standing in the ruins of his own creation. Within 72 hours of the gala, the news of the Vanguard Designs scandal broke across regional financial headlines. The video footage of the presentation, captured by several local news crews, went viral. The story of a greedy CEO who attempted to bankrupt his loyal wife while embezzling corporate funds for his mistress became a national cautionary tale. Mark's lead investors pulled every dollar of their venture capital out of the waterfront project before the week was over. Bank after bank issued immediate default notices on his corporate loans. Because the forensic audit proved that Mark had engaged in intentional fraud and document forgery, the court took drastic action. All funds in the secret Delaware shell company, including the $750,000 he had siphoned away, were officially frozen and ordered to be restored to our joint marital estate. The forged mortgage on our family home was declared null and void by a judge, holding Mark personally liable for the bank's legal fees. And then came the collapse of his personal life. Chloe didn't stick around to help Mark rebuild. The moment she realized the shell company was seized, and that Mark was facing millions of dollars in civil liabilities and potential criminal charges for fraud, she packed her bags and vanished. A mutual friend told me that when Mark ran to her luxury penthouse apartment, desperate for comfort, shelter, and a place to hide from the press, he found the door locked, the lease terminated, and his keycard revoked. Chloe had moved out overnight, leaving him completely alone. He had sacrificed 10 years of genuine love, loyalty, and partnership for an illusion that vanished the second the money dried up. 6 months after that fateful night at the St. Regis, our divorce was finalized. Because of the severe bad faith, illegal asset concealment, and forgery Mark committed during our marriage, the court awarded me 80% of our total marital assets. I received the full ownership rights to our home, which I promptly sold to start completely fresh. I also received a substantial payout from the court, ordered liquidation of Vanguard Designs. Mark lost everything. His architectural license was suspended pending the outcome of the corporate fraud investigation. He had to sell his luxury car, move out of his high-end neighborhood, and take a low-level drafting job at a small firm in another state just to pay off his mounting legal debts. The last time I saw Mark was inside a cold, gray courtroom on the day the final papers were signed. He didn't look like the sharp, arrogant corporate executive who had scoffed at my dress 6 months ago. He looked hollow-aged and exhausted. His tailored suit was loose, and the spark of arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, permanent shadow of regret. As we walked out of the courtroom, he called out to me one last time in the hallway. "Sarah, please," he choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "Can we just talk for 5 minutes? Just 5 minutes." I stopped and turned to look at him. But I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hatred. I felt nothing at all, and that was the greatest victory of all. "There's nothing left to say, Mark," I replied softly. "I ruined everything, didn't I?" he asked, a tear finally slipping down his cheek. "I had everything a man could ever ask for, and I threw it all away for nothing." "You didn't throw it away by accident, Mark," I told him, holding his gaze with absolute clarity. "You made a choice every single day to lie, to betray, and to destroy the person who built you up. You thought I was weak because I was quiet. But quiet people watch everything, and when pushed too far, we don't scream. We execute." He stood there, speechless, unable to utter a single word as I turned and walked toward the glass doors of the courthouse. Mamo Arel Refalufin. Life has a funny way of delivering justice. When someone betrays you, your initial instinct is to rage, to fight, and to let your emotions destroy your peace. But true strength isn't found in explosive anger. It is found in cold, calm self-control. Never mistake a good person's patience for weakness. A loyal heart is a powerful shield. But when that shield is broken by greed and deceit, it turns into a mirror that forces the betrayer to face exact justice for what they've done. Mark thought he was setting a trap for my future. In the end, he only built a cage for his own. As for me, I bought a small, beautiful home near the coast. I launched my own financial consulting firm, one dedicated to helping women protect their assets and navigate complex legal divorces. I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my peace. And I learned that the best revenge isn't hatred. It's living a life so successful and serene that the ghosts of your past can never touch you again.